Today, professional B2B sales is actually management consulting. And so you have to be intellectually curious. You have to be a problem solver. You have to be able to work and build relationships and build trust with clients and prospects so you help them get to a better future. So I think the innate capabilities required for that are intelligence, passion, and optimism. And humility isn't being humble or really shy. Humility is, I know enough to know I don't know everything, and I'm willing to learn, and I want to learn and get better and develop.
This is the Entrepreneurs United podcast with your hosts, John St. Pierre and Rich Hoffman.
Welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast. Today we're sitting down with Mark Cox. He's the founder of In the Funnel Sales Coaching and also the author of this book, Learn to Love Selling, the Universal B2B Sales Playbook. Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, John. It's great to be here. And Rich, it's great to meet you.
Mark, we've learned over the past few weeks that we have a lot in common. We're both Canadians. We both grew up being young entrepreneurs in small student painting franchises. And we have one thing in common as well. We understand that sales is an essential part to entrepreneurship. Can you talk to us about, through your journey, why you picked sales as your area of expertise that you want to go deep and help entrepreneurs with?
I think sales picked me. And so although I started as an entrepreneur and we had that franchise student painting background, when I left that industry as a very young person, maybe 23 or 24, I'd been an entrepreneur for 3 or 4 years running a painting organization. I had opened it up in 2 different countries. And so I was looking to take those skills into the corporate world. And it was pretty interesting interviewing with HR people in the mid-90s looking for kind of a senior job because they couldn't really understand at all what I had done as an entrepreneur, but they could sense somebody who had sales skills. So I fell into B2B sales when I left the entrepreneurial world way back when and jumped into the corporate world. They recognized the sales skill and put me there. And it was an accident, but a really good one. So I started selling the earliest technology, very large photocopiers. I got into selling large services and solution sales and technology. And in the end, I was selling some of the largest transactions you can sell, which are large outsourcing deals. And in fact, culminated with doing $1 billion deal at one point in time. So that all led me to this world of B2B sales and then running large sales organizations. And that's why I continue to dedicate my professional career to this business discipline, which I think is the most important one, whether you're in the corporate world or an entrepreneur.
Natural born salesperson, myth, or is there reality to it? Before you answer, I want to say my understanding, and confirmed with a memory doctor. I went with my father to a memory doctor just this last Friday, that we're born with certain switches, and then that's nature. And nurture, you turn on those switches or you don't. Is there a sales switch that people are born with and then nurture either turns it on or off? Or is there no such thing at all and all of it can be learned? What part of this is there a natural born salesperson versus you can train anything?
What a great question, Rich. It's the second one. So no, you're not natural. By the way, 40 or 50 years ago, what sales was then, maybe you were born into it. Because 40 or 50 years ago, a salesperson was a talking brochure, fundamentally. And they were very good at talking, or they're very good at pitching. But today, professional B2B sales is actually management consulting. And so you have to be intellectually curious. You have to be a problem solver. You have to be able to work and build relationships and build trust with clients and prospects so you help them get to a better future. So I think the innate capabilities required for that are intelligence, passion, and optimism. And humility isn't being humble or really shy. Humility is, I know enough to know I don't know everything, and I'm willing to learn, and I want to learn and get better and develop. So I think, Rich, you can teach those things to anybody. And by the way, we know there's lots of studies that speak to introverts being very good professional salespeople, or ambiverts being good salespeople. And many of the entrepreneurs listening to this podcast, I'm pretty sure many of them are SaaS entrepreneurs. And most SaaS entrepreneurs originate because a developer created something and then said, hey, it's a product and I'm going to sell it to multiple people. What those listeners will understand is they're still probably the best salesperson in their company, even though they say, quote unquote, I'm not a salesperson. I just want to help clients and build relationships and solve problems. But the reality of it is in 2024, that is what B2B sales is.
Can you repeat those? I got intelligence. I got them out of order though. Intelligence, drive, optimism, passion, humility.
Those are the five. Yeah. It's intelligence, drive, humility, and then passion and optimism.
All right. So most of those I get teaching. Humility, I'm struggling with. How do you teach someone not the behaviors that one who is humble takes on, but the attribute of actually experiencing humility so the expression of it is genuine? How would you teach that?
Oh, great question. Smarter people than me, of which there are so many, have thought through this before, Rich, but one of the ones I'd point our listeners to today would be Carol Dweck in a great book that she's written called Growth Mindset. And so in the world, we have these folks who are either fixed mindset, they believe their skills, capabilities, ability, it's really inherent and they're born with it. And growth mindset, through hard work, rehearsal, practice, learning, I can get better. One of the things that Dweck points out in that book that is really amazing, great book, great, easy read. The first thing is we're all on a continuum where nobody's an absolute growth mindset or fixed mindset. The second thing is in different stages of our life or phases of our life, we may have a growth mindset, for example, as a musician or John's kids as athletes, but we might have a fixed mindset at work. So one of the main ways you can change someone's mindset from fixed to growth, but one of the main ways of doing that is actually explaining to them the difference and having them think about what part of their life do they actually have a growth mindset so they can pull it in. Now, one of the things you said at the beginning, hey, are you born or can you teach sales? You can teach sales, but I said those are the capabilities someone needs. I'm not sure in my career I've spent a lot of time trying to teach someone humility. I've just interviewed for it. So if you don't have intelligence, drive, and humility, those are things you need. I'm not going to try and change somebody who doesn't have those things. I'm just not going to hire them for a professional sales job.
All right. So work with me on the interview part. Other than listening for people's answers when they talk about their accomplishments, and do they use the word I or we or acknowledge anyone else? Outside of that, how do you interview for humility?
Well, a couple of questions. First would be, what are you reading right now? How do I know John St. Pierre is humble and he's got humility? Because he wrote a great book, The $100 Million Journey, and it's littered with other people's books. And the best part about it, I've never seen this in a book, team listening. John actually summarizes other amazing books. Okay, so first of all, the first question, somebody is, what are you reading right now? Okay. The second question I like to ask interview candidates, no matter who they are. I might be interviewing somebody for a chief revenue officer role, an SVP of sales. I'm just going to ask them, what's the next thing you need to learn? And how they answer that question, if somebody goes, man, that's a really good question. Let me think about that. I got to really think about that. I don't know if they're filled with humility. But if they go, somebody comes back and says, listen, there's 3 things I'm reading right now. They might be talking about something slightly outside of work too. The third way I might ask that question, Rich, is I'd say, tell me something that you're passionate about. And they might say, hey, I'm a drummer in a rock band. I'm a part-time drummer. Okay, tell me a little bit about that. And as they describe it, are they just enjoying the experience or they talk about practicing and rehearsing and getting better and watching YouTube videos and slowing down the YouTube videos so you can see what a drummer does because that's what I have to do? So I think there's lots of ways that someone can explain to you how they go at a problem and what they do. And those are some of the questions I might ask in an interview to find out if someone's got enough humility to be part of the team. The last very obvious one is something like, tell me about some point in time in your career where you were working with a leader who had a courageous conversation with you about how you were doing, and tell me about how that helped. So that might be this conversation where you say, listen, they can take feedback, they can take input, and they actually want to get better. And they appreciate it when somebody has a courageous conversation with them.
I am taking notes. John, you were saying?
Yeah, no, I was just going to talk to this. I think one of the things you're identifying here through these 4 sub-bullets of intel, drive, humility, passion, and optimism is really as a start, as an entrepreneur or a sales leader, who you're bringing in needs to match these core components. In a way, even though you said sales techniques and a lot of things could be taught, as a sales recruiter or hiring salespeople within your organization, you want to bring in people that are as high level in these 4 areas as possible, because it's not your job to teach them these things. You want them to come to you with them so that you can teach them how to sell your product or service from the go. Is that maybe the best way to put it?
Exactly. It can be taught if you've got the right foundation. And those 5 things are actually the foundation.
So I'm curious, instead of, you could go either way. I may put you on the spot here, and I apologize in advance.
No, this is great, Rich. Thanks. Ask anything for sure.
I would love if, instead of you talking about the construct of sales, is if we did a role play and you sold John something, and then we backwards engineer, what did you do there? That was the use of the construct. Is that something that would be an access point? Or if not, we can just get right into the construct.
We can do either. I'm happy to do either. And
John, you up for being sold?
Absolutely.
And by the way, if it's too super boring, you can edit it out of the podcast. And so, folks, you'll realize if it made it into the podcast, maybe there's something here. But offline, when we started, John was talking about the construction company and the sales team that he's got there. So maybe the idea might be, Rich, and I'll jump in at certain times to speed things up, but maybe we have this conversation about that sales team as if they need a little bit of sales training.
How apropos. That sounds perfect.
Let's do it.
So I'll start with the construct, but my first question would be to John would be to say, listen, thank you so much for taking the time to have a conversation with me, John. I've gone online. I've noticed that you do have this construction firm and you've got 7 salespeople. I see you're growing pretty rapidly. By the way, I've always enjoyed your podcasts, and I really enjoyed the one with Mark Cox, even though he's bald and has a broken nose. I do very much enjoy your podcast, but tell me a little bit about the business and where you're taking the business, because I know you've had a really interesting growth trajectory recently.
Yeah, so we're looking to double the size of our business here over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And so we're investing heavily in our sales and marketing infrastructure, as well as our operations team, in order to support the growth. And our key, Mark, is we're in some pretty large accounts that if we just went deeper within those accounts, we actually have the growth within the current customer base that we already have. So we're looking to navigate those waters while also bringing on new logos to the business.
Amazing. And how do you compete and win in the market, John? When you say, hey, we're in some great accounts today, how did you get those accounts, and what's the sort of value proposition? How do you compete and win in your market?
Yeah, so I guess the first part is some accounts we've had for a duration of time, and our continued performance year over year has enabled us to grow within those accounts and continue to do more business for that one customer. But one of the concerns we have, Mark, is customer concentration ratio, where we have too much business with a couple of large accounts. So we're looking to move into new accounts. And in terms of our value proposition, we've been in this industry for 20 plus years. So a lot of it is our track record of success and the experience level of our team, because when these large accounts hire us, They're hiring us to manage projects at a distance on their behalf in a successful manner. We've perfected that remote management of projects on their behalf. As an example, we work for a large account that has 17,000 locations. So when they needed sneeze guards put up during COVID, they hired us, and within a month, we had all 17,000 locations with sneeze guards up between the cashiers and the people, right? So those types of projects we handle for our customers, and we can do that at a great pace.
And why do they invest in your business? So when you think of something of that nature, an organization that has 17,000 locations,
yeah,
they have the size and scale where outsourcing almost anything is hard to make sense because they have such size and scale. They can build the capability in-house or buy your company.
Yep.
So why is it they would outsource it to your organization versus doing it in-house?
So I would say speed, trust, and the ability to scale up and down. So if you do it inside your organization, you're onboarding all these people to do projects and then maybe potentially letting them go and bringing them back. So by outsourcing it, they can scale up and down their projects as large as they can and want to. And then speed and trust. They trust us to execute a project with the right level of deployment and performance level in terms of getting the project done. We say we're going to get it done.
This is just great, by the way, John, and thank you for this. Thank you so much. And I did notice that testimonial on your website from ABC Company. And boy, they spoke of you as almost as if you're a member of their own team. So it was almost as if you were an insourced organization doing this.
Yep.
John, tell me a little bit about the sales cycle today. So what's the average duration of a sales cycle for us? And tell me a little bit about the people who actually make a decision to actually move forward with our services. We call that the buyer persona.
Yeah. Our sales cycle, I would say, averages a year.
A year?
Oh, yeah. I'd say that some of our accounts took more than that, and some of them would take less than that. Never less than 3 months. 6 months can be fairly common, but some of our larger accounts take a long time to vet us and see us over and over again at industry associations and shows and things of that nature. And the buyer persona is typically a vice president of facilities, a vice president of construction within large multi-site commercial companies where they have hundreds, if not thousands of locations. And they're tasked with deploying capital in those locations, either for improvements and or routine maintenance and repair type of situations. So they oversee a large territory where they're looking to get things done efficiently and in a painless manner.
And to tell me a little bit about what that buyer persona is going through. It sounds like you understand your buyer persona, the person you sell to, very well. But very briefly, what are they living through? When you start to think of their roles and their responsibilities, what are they living through? What are the trends affecting their business? And how important is the things that we bring to the table to them?
Yeah. I'd start off with procurement. So they're always budget.
Yay.
Right? So they're always provided a specific budget to do specific projects, and they got to find the right companies to deploy and execute those projects within their budget, but in a manner that's not going to cause them headaches either. Because we all know the contracting world, and when you're dealing with contractors at a distance from across the country, there's a lot of variables there. And I think what they ultimately want a company like us to do is manage those many variables for them to ensure the project gets done on time in a trusted manner.
Can you tell me a little more about that? The things they're dealing with and what keeps them focused or concerned on a regular basis?
Yeah. So a lot of the projects we're doing are within their own buildings, but they still have site managers or customers that are walking into those locations, or they want to be open for business. And so in a lot of situations, if there's a planned opening of a new location on January 15th and it doesn't open until March 15th, that's revenue. That's off budget. That's off plan. If there's maintenance and repairs that need to be done on a location, think about different hurricanes and tornadoes we just recently had, and the store's inoperable. They're not generating revenue and working. So they have a lot of pressure that way. But then they also have the pressure of the budget constraints being done. And if something happens on site where a contractor doesn't do something, somebody trips over the carpet because it wasn't put down properly, there's a lawsuit, there's a lot of liability that can come with these particular type of projects as well. So they're dealing with cost constraints, liability issues, loss of revenue situations. Those are probably the big three I can think of.
Wow. They all tie to major things, right? These are I've got three things every company tries to do:
Yep.
drive revenue, reduce costs, reduce risk. Reduce risk is a huge one. Give me the name of 2 or 3 companies that you would love a first meeting with that you haven't had one with up to date.
That's a good question. This may not be accurate for the role model perspective because I'm not sure there's too many that we haven't met with that we want to. But in our space, it would be Target. It would be a national, Starbucks type location, hundreds of sites, companies like that are blue chip doing well. We're trying to stay out of retail right now because of the future retail being in question. So we're moving into a lot of healthcare, a lot of essential services, those Kroger. How about that?
Perfect. Kroger. And then finally, I'm going to skirt to the end, guys. I'm going to skirt to the end here. This would continue for some time where I'd actually map out through this questioning, get you thinking about the 4 core elements of the sales playbook. But one of the final questions I'd like is one from a friend of ours named Dan Sullivan, but I think it's magnificent. It's not ours, but we ask it all the time. Hey, John, if we were having this conversation a year from now, what has to happen with the sales organization for you to be absolutely thrilled with the progress you've made in these 12 months? So we're having this conversation now, November 19th of 2025. What are you looking to do with the sales organization so that you'd actually be thrilled with what's taken place?
I would say that we have 10 new logo accounts with multi-million-dollar annual opportunities. And in addition to that, I would say that we had on average 10% minimal growth with our existing accounts through account management.
And in ballpark figures, okay, we had the 10% growth. And let's say we'd got 1 or 2 of these large accounts, these $10 million, multi-million dollar opportunities. What would the revenue potentially mean to your business?
That'd mean about a $20 million increase in revenue next year.
Yeah. So when we think of that, on your list of top priorities for next year, where does something like that kind of growth place?
Extremely high.
Okay. So let's hold there for a second, guys. That would be, frankly, our discoveries last the better part of an hour. But in that kind of conversation, you could let me know what you observed, Rich.
Yeah.
But one of the things I'd ask you is, how much did I talk about sales training in that conversation?
Not at all.
Why not? We're great at sales training.
I'd say because it's not about you. It's about the customer, and nobody's going to buy from you until they feel they're understood. And they would like to be understood before they care to put in the time to understand you. And if you can understand what their problem is or what their desire is, there's also an automatic transfer of the belief that you can solve it because you understand it.
Yeah. That's it. And I'm open to any comments or observations about what you saw, but that's all we try and do in terms of a conversation is really make the conversation about them, their business, their goals, their objectives. What are they trying to achieve? And generally, what we're trying to do is we earn the right to proceed with the conversation by asking questions that what we didn't do there because I didn't go online and check things in real time. But I want to earn the right for a reasonable answer by doing some research prior. So before I'd speak to John about this specifically, I'd be online, I'd understand John, the business, some of the trends in the industry. So I'd be leveraging things like, John, I see you had a wonderful PR post about Kruger as a new client. Congratulations. Tell me a little bit about that sales cycle. And I'm trying to play on Cialdini's theory of reciprocity and earn the right to learn more about John's business with an authentic conversation. But I have to earn that right on a sales call. I have to earn the right for every next conversation. Any other things that you observed? How did that feel, John? Did that feel like you were getting a dental cleaning, or did that feel like a reasonably authentic conversation?
No, it felt genuinely curious. The questions were ones where I knew the answer, but I wanted to think about the answer before I provided it, because it wasn't as if I was provided the list of questions beforehand and prepared. So it makes me think on the spot what's going on, which would result in pretty genuine, authentic responses, but then also provide room for conversation. Tell me more about that, or have me think a little bit more about the question. So I thought that was a good challenge to be asked those questions. So it didn't feel like a dental cleaning, but it felt like you were genuinely authentic. And I had to think about my responses to make sure, is this the right answer? Yeah, this is the right answer. Yeah, this is what it is.
Mhm. And I'd say one of the things I noticed when you said, tell me about the sales cycle, what does that look like for us?
Yeah.
I noticed you with intention used the word us, but it wasn't awkward or even notable. And he just answered, but you're immediately identifying as being part of the unit, part of us. And so what does that look like for you? What does that look like for us? I noticed you never interrupted, not once. I noticed for those that are listening, instead of watching the YouTube, there was constant nonverbal affirmation that John was being listened to. And it came across almost as praise and encouragement for John to continue talking.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rich. It did feel, although I was the one answering the question, that I was giving the right answers because I was getting the affirmation that, oh yeah, absolutely. It was very, very positive.
I liked, and you said, we're going to fast forward to the end. And I think that's because some of the stuff you did at the end is probably consistent in the sales process and something you probably recommend to your clients, I assume, which is really narrowing in on what does success look like for you in the future? Asking a question about what would that mean to you if you got it? And then that final question on how important is that to you? And if they say that's not important, then you probably have a few follow-up questions on it. If they say that's important, I think you've got the information to be able to start suggesting. I'm guessing you probably go to where you've helped people like him in the past.
You're absolutely right with all of those things. And Rich, and the truth of it is, and again, I certainly broke one of my main rules there. For that little role play, there was no preparation. But the truth of it is, I do try and walk into any conversation like that. These are exactly the conversations we have it in the funnel. And we're speaking to the John St. Pierres of the world who run organizations that are looking with their sales organization. But what we try and coach our team and our clients on is that authentic intent. The intent is not to try and drive a new qualified sales opportunity. The intent is not to learn, hey, John makes a decision, but Rich influences him, and another person named Peter and somebody named Judy does. Those things help me, but they don't actually help John. The intent is actually to get on a conversation with the CEO, earn the right to have this authentic conversation about their business, and no matter what, add some value in that conversation. So that's really one of the things that we'd be making sure we close for. And the second thing is, if I just have this authentic conversation, then at the end, I can figure out, boy, I wonder if I can help these people or not. We've had lots of conversations where we're not a perfect fit for them. And so if that's the case, then we're going to find a good fit or we're going to point them in the right direction. But that's our intent. And there's a fellow, you guys are both so well read. There's a fellow named Dr. Nick Morgan. I believe he's from Harvard, but his book is called Can You Hear Me? Can You Hear Me? And it just talks about how we can all sense someone else's intent. We can sense the intent. So is Mark jumping on this conversation so he can make a quick withdrawal, meaning he wants to extract money from me, he wants to extract a sales opportunity? Or is Mark jumping on the call to actually make a deposit to give me something and to try and help me out? And so if you get away from the outcome, but just focus on the process of trying to help another business professional, good things are going to happen for you.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I've never heard that book. I'm assuming you said, Can You Hear Me twice intentionally? That's the name of the...
I did not. No,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Wait a minute. He's a natural born salesperson.
So I just thought maybe that was the title of the book, was it saying it twice. But you mentioned earlier the 4 core elements, but I just want to make sure we captured the 4
Sure.
core elements. I think that one of them was discovery.
No, I'm sorry. Let me clarify.
Okay.
The 4 core elements of our playbook are value proposition. So can you communicate your value proposition to the market first? Number 2, territory management. So how do you prioritize the pursuit of your target market? Number 3 is demand generation. So if I know my value prop and I've actually prioritized the pursuit of my target market, I have to go create demand from that target market. So the number 3 is demand generation, or what they would have called cold calling 50 years ago. And then number 4 is sales execution. So sales execution is a combination of understanding sales process, the steps to complete a sale for your business. That's where discovery comes in. It's also understanding sales strategy. Sales strategy is our game plan to actually progress along those steps successfully. Third, pipeline management, funnel management. What volume and velocity of activities do I need to actually have enough in my pipe that when I use reasonable conversion rates, I'm going to hit my goals? And then finally, we do have to think about kind of tactical things like negotiations and then objection handling, those types of things. Those all fall under sales execution. So the 4 elements of the playbook: value proposition, territory management, demand generation, sales execution.
Gotcha. Thanks for clarifying that. It's interesting because the amount of times I've had somebody say to me, I am not a salesperson, that you mentioned earlier, if I had a dime for every time kind of story. And it's funny that in a lot of the cases, they knew their product or service in and out, and they didn't have to sell, because if they were talking to somebody about their knowledge of it, they were selling by default. And
Yeah.
what I also know is that a lot of entrepreneurs who were the best salesperson of their product or service, which inherently has to be when you start something because you're the only one selling it, are typically not really good sales managers. And so I want to talk about that for a minute. We all know the adage that your best salesperson isn't your best sales manager. But I also think in your book, you talk a lot about this whole idea of leading a sales team as being one of the most difficult jobs that exists for a lot of reasons. Can you shed some more light on that? And for entrepreneurs and or leaders of sales teams, I want them to maybe get a few tidbits beyond the hiring profile we talked about earlier. How can they be best leading their sales team, and what tips do you have for them?
Amazing. Thank you. Great questions. So the first is, why is it the hardest job out there? It's the hardest job on the executive team by far. It's not even close. I've had other jobs on the executive team because you've got the 3 most demanding stakeholders in business. So as a sales leader, of course, you've got to be in front of clients, and they're the most important stakeholder for any business. So I've got to be in front of my clients, but they've got a real appetite for time and attention. The second group I'm actually working with, my sales team, and they've got an insatiable appetite for time and attention. So that's very demanding. And then third, I've got you 2 guys. I've got the other members of my executive team who I've got to report into, maybe my chairman, maybe my president, CEO. And they've got a very black and white kind of scorecard for how I'm doing. Now, if we think of the other members of the executive team, head of operations, head of HR, head of marketing, head of product, their scorecard is far less black and white than mine, and it's not on the public display. It's not the scoreboard that everybody can see in the hockey game. So mine's the only one. We know if we're winning, we know if we're losing. That creates a lot of pressure. And the main pressure for a sales leader today is just volume of work. So one of the things that everybody can take away today is thinking about, as a leader, what's the objective? What's the why? My job is not to make me the star of the story. My job, my role is to unleash the potential of the members of my sales team. It's to influence their future behavior in a positive way, but we make it about them. So I need to do 3 things to make that happen. 1, of course, I have to inspect. There is inspection or management as part of a sales leadership role. The second is I've got to coach. I've got to be able to coach properly. And third, I've got to motivate. For most businesses today, and certainly CEOs when they try and, lead the sales team on the side of their desk as a part-time job, what they'll end up doing is it's all inspection. So all they do is try and inspect and track. And then every once in a while, when they have a little more time, what they do is opportunity management. So they'll say, tell me about the 3 deals you're closest on. And they're going to tell the salesperson how to close it. That's what happens. So really what we're trying to do here is say sales leadership is super important job, getting leverage. Your book is so great, John, in terms of talking about entrepreneurs have to get up, they have to elevate and stop doing everything and get teams to do it. That's what sales leadership is. But it's very difficult not to want to go back on the ice and score a few more goals. Much more difficult to sit on the bench and coach somebody else to do that. So those are the things. So if anybody listening today, I think about how do you set up your active sales management cadence, meaning your meetings, to make sure you cover those 3 things.
No, that's great. And I think I wanted to dive a little bit deeper there. So if most, in the absence of knowing how or having enough time because they're not focused on enough, can get the inspect part. What's the scoreboard say? And are you doing your job or not doing it? And I would say motivation, there's a lot of techniques to motivating, but at the end of the day, if you needed to put some more bonus, put some more thing on, you can motivate rah. But I think it's the coaching one that maybe is being highlighted here as one that a lot of entrepreneurs and or sales leaders may need the most development in. And so if I'm sitting down with a sales rep, in addition to opportunity pipeline management, and hey, did you hit your goal or not hit your goal? And hey, here's a little motivation for you. What should I be doing exactly to help coach them? And what is the coaching model that you suggest using?
Get in the field. Marketing automation technology, sales automation technology in 2012, it didn't do us any favors. It pushed sales leaders from being in the field to sitting behind a desk counting stuff. And you two will remember very well, probably you can tell me, how terrified were you before that first estimate you did for College Pro painters back in the day? You guys looked the same. I had a beautiful head of hair in those days. I looked different, but boy, was I scared. You know what my leader did? The guy did the DM. I can still remember his name, so meaningful. His name was Paul Pasco, and he was fantastic. And we knocked on that first door, and he'd agreed, we'd all agreed, said, I was doing the first estimate. I've been through training in a classroom, but this is different. And he let me go through it. Okay. And it was painful for me, but I'm sure it was agonizing for him. He didn't jump in. He didn't tell me what to do. He didn't take over the sales call. He let me go through it. We then left. I did not close that deal. We went to a Tim Hortons, God bless Canada, and we sat down. We said, hey, let's go back to our model of what we're trying to do in an estimate. Hey, Mark, I want you to think of 2 things that went really well there. Just take a minute. And I was about to jump in. I did. And he said, take a pause. And then he said, I want you to write down 2 things you might do differently next time. And he said, I'm going to do the same. And then he said, okay, Mark, what do you think? And I said, you know what? I completely tanked it. He said, Mark, I asked for 2 things that went well. What are the 2 things you did well? So he had a very intentional way of trying to coach me. Then he did one. And then we did the same thing. We both ranked and rated them. Then I did one again. Then he did one. And this was this slow, methodical, intentional way of trying to elevate my performance. So literally, as you guys know, 3 weeks in, 4 weeks in, you're getting pretty good at this.
Yep.
Right? You're starting to close $7,000 to fix $6,000 paint jobs. And for those listening, I know $6,000 doesn't sound like a lot when you're doing a B2B sale. To extract $6,000 from somebody when you're painting their living room, and the guys you're bringing up a month ago were at university, it's not easy to do that. The guys who were painting the house were in university drinking beers a month ago. It's tough to get that. Those programs, I thought they were very good with their coaching. And I think today, a lot of those similar principles adhere, where you let somebody try and then you both self-diagnose it. And hopefully they get better at self-diagnosing as well so they can continue to improve. But you've got to get out in the field with them.
Yeah, I love that. We are cut from the same cloth. I don't think you're going to be able to get away from the post closing of this podcast when we ask you what are two things we did well and two things we could do to do better, because we're all trained the same exact way. But it was that coaching element that provided us the foundation for us to be successful. And way too often we onboard a new sales rep and we're like, here you go. Here's your PowerPoint presentation and your mouse pad, and go ahead, start making some calls and good luck. And you have to hit this quota in the first quarter and go. And that style that we were coached in doesn't exist. And I think part of the issue is that they don't actually have their sales model to coach
Right.
you. So the trainee isn't trained on a model that then when we go do the sales presentation, I can coach you to the model and provide you specific feedback. How do companies get over that one? Because a lot of companies just don't have a sales competency model.
They do a couple of things, maybe just to throw out. Now, I'd like to come back to one other thing on the coaching, but just on the sales competency model. It's okay, by the way, if we're a smaller business that has been founder-led and founder-sold for a number of years, and we're trying to build out a sales organization, I think what we have to do is be honest in the process with a candidate that says, look, we've been around for 10 years, but for the most part, we've had one person who's been very good at selling for the business. We're trying to scale now. So what we're looking for is somebody who's got that entrepreneurial flair, but you need to understand we can't just tell you exactly what to do. By the time the three of us went through Student Painters, they had a very specific script and process for selling house painting. And by the way, that's the only way those companies existed. They sold better than the local painter, was way better quality. It was a better product. Student Painters sold better. College pros sold better. But what we have to do when we're hiring people into the team is say, listen, you've got to be nimble here because the world's changing, the environment's changing, but our business is changing as well. And so what we need to do, we've got a point of view as to what we think people should be doing now, but we have to be nimble. We may have to adapt. We may have to change. So we're going to try and give you a framework as best we can, but we expect some creativity. And I think there's a certain type of individual out there that wants the creativity. And there's certain individuals out there that just want to execute a well-defined, mature playbook for a mature business. You just have to find the sales job that's right for you and the candidate that's right for you.
Mark, in almost every company, there's this natural tension between sales and operations. And operations is saying, hey, sales did whatever it took to be able to land that job, or they cut margins in order to get it. And sales is saying, boy, operations, they're not quite listening and they're not delivering the way that they need to deliver in quality or in a timely manner. So that's one concept I want to lay out. There's this concept of organizational health and this concept of EOS that says, let's put the salespeople in a team with the people in operations. Let's give them a common goal, and they are likely to work together because they have collective responsibility for a common goal. But salespeople are competitive by nature and often don't want to be slowed down to think about and worry about somebody else's job. What, in your experience, is the best way to relieve this sales and operations tension? And does, in your experience, putting them on a team with collective responsibility for a common goal, does that work with salespeople?
Yeah, what a great question. Man, your questions are so well thought out, guys. So first of all, I like some form of natural tensions generally in life and in business. So whether it's sales and operations or sales and marketing or delivery, there's always going to be these natural tensions. And so I do think we need individual accountabilities for things. So I know what I'm responsible for. Somebody else knows what they're responsible for. However, second thing is, I also believe 1 + 1 = 3, 4, or 5. Teamwork matters. Collaboration matters. So in almost every business at a mid-size level that we've ever seen, there's either one problem. We either have a problem with sales, we have a problem with delivery. We're either not selling enough, and then they do something to fix it, invest in the sales training, and then they're selling too much, and somebody's coming back and saying, slow down. Or you folks would be dealing with, folks who have actual assets where to scale up in a manufacturing business, you actually have to buy capacity. You're buying new technologies to deliver. Now everything's empty. So we sold up and we've got to do these things. The first thing, particularly now, I'm sensing a lot of in the workforce these days, and the stats back me up. One of the things I think that's important in life, empathy. So yes, I'm part of the company, and yes, I'm in sales, and maybe I've had a pretty good year, let's say. And because of that, my operations or my delivery team is getting choked out because we've sold too much. And they're getting pressure from the executive team. I need empathy to actually put myself in their shoes and understand what they're going through, because 2 years before that, they had available capacity because the sales team wasn't performing. And we needed empathy from them when we were having a tough time in the market. So one of the things I think about is, yes, salespeople are competitive, Rich, but what I think the type of competition I'm looking for on a sales team is not hockey. Golf, not hockey. When we go out, the three of us, hopefully someday in the future, to play a nice round of golf, I'll be honest with you, I'd like to beat you too. But when we tee off and you lose your ball and I see where it went, I'm going to find it with you. Okay? I'm not going to just ignore where it is. When I putt and miss my putt inevitably before you putt, I'm going to tell you what the lie is. We're competitive, but we're collaborative. Hockey's not like that. Hockey's a win-lose game. Somebody's going to win, somebody's going to lose. I like that spirit of competition, and I do believe there's some, if you have the right people around the room where there's trust at the executive team, then we can actually speak the truth. We can have those courageous conversations and have straight talk, but we do need empathy and we need respect. And if those things happen, I think good things can come of it.
Thank you for that. And if people want to get more of you, obviously the recommendation would be buy the book. There's a lot of good stuff in there. And then how else would you like them to get more of you?
Oh, thank you for asking, Rich. So folks, the easiest way to connect with us is connect with me on LinkedIn. It's Mark Cox @InTheFunnel on LinkedIn. So we love new connections. You could ask a question. We love engagement. We love chatting with people with LinkedIn. And the website, by the way, is inthefunnel.com, inthefunnel.com. Happy to chat with anybody anytime. And by the way, what a pleasure speaking with you both. Great questions today. Really got me thinking. So I appreciate that. It's just, what a wonderful conversation.
Yeah. And as a quick reminder, Mark's book is Learn to Love Selling. Recommend picking it up. Thanks again for being on, Mark.
Thank you so much for having me both. It's a real pleasure meeting both of you.
Stay tuned as John and Rich unpack today's conversation.
John, that coaching model that he talked about with observe the person, the coachee, doing it, take a look at the model of how it's supposed to happen, listen to the learners, areas to continue, areas to improve, and then as the coach, provide yours. Now, he did that in a conversational way where they alternated, is what I heard. But how fascinating is that where he grew up in the student painting business and where we grew up in different businesses, but both student painting, we're using some of those same coaching methods that are so effective.
Yeah. I think way too often as entrepreneurs and leaders, when we hear you got to coach your team, we envision sitting on a Zoom or a Google Meet or in our office face-to-face coaching the person, as opposed to sitting at their desk when they're handling a customer service call, going out in the field with them to a site or to a customer sales pitch. Literally get in there and observe. And what I love the most, Rich, was be willing to observe and let the person go through it. Don't interject. Don't jump in. Don't try and save the sale. Let the person go through it and then provide them coaching feedback afterwards with the format of hearing them out first. What are 2 things you did well or 2 things you could do better? And then I'll provide my feedback of 2 things you did well and 2 things you could do better. But imagine, I don't care how much experience you have. I don't care how long you've been in the sales industry. If your vice president of sales or chief revenue officer or CEO or president are sitting next to you saying, I'm going to come in this sales process and just observe you and provide you feedback afterwards, you're nervous. You're on your game. You're thinking through different things, right? And you're getting really good actionable feedback. And if you can then twist it or reverse that, where you can actually go to a sales pitch and observe them do it, the learnings are great. I don't care if you've been in the industry 20 years. Just having that coaching opportunity is fantastic. Think about pro athletes or musicians being coached all the time on how they could do their craft better. Salespeople don't get enough coaching. That's the biggest takeaway I'm taking from this. They simply do not get enough coaching.
And this isn't we're not debriefing simply on coaching, but I would be remiss if I didn't say, if somebody's going to go out and they're going to start doing some of this coaching that Mark talked about, that you and I have experienced and that we apply, it is the number one thing that a coach needs to select is, am I going to demonstrate or am I going to observe? Because you can't do both. Inevitably, if you don't actually select that you're going to demonstrate or observe, you inevitably are going to end up demonstrating.
Yep.
You're going to jump in and take over instead of really sitting back, observing what happens in your absence and then giving feedback afterwards. So I could not emphasize that enough.
And it's the hardest
John,
thing to do. It's so hard to just sit there and observe.
You've got to be willing to sacrifice the sale.
Yeah.
If you're observing a sale, and that's what this was about, if you're observing the sale, you got to be willing to sacrifice the sale and not get it because you chose to not jump in, because you have a really big learning opportunity. Because the goal of the coaching event is increase the skill of the learner. The goal of the coaching event is not land the sale. So that's the hardest thing to do, is be able to give up that sale because you're on side with, this is about increasing skill, not selling. So the authentic intent, oh my gosh, the idea that people can sense what your real intent is. I think that is so true and so great just to call that out, and having to be on the correct side of intent and have exploratory conversations and be genuinely curious and ask questions. And maybe you'll be able to work with them and maybe you won't, but you want to add value. You want to learn about them. And if it ends up where you can work with them, that would be great. And if it doesn't, maybe you can refer them and you have a referral to send them somewhere else.
Yeah, I think he also talked about something I think is really important. I know you and I subscribe to that just by fault of doing this podcast, is be willing to give. Be willing to support, provide solutions, give without any expectation of anything in return. And if you do get something in return, great, but don't do it for the return. And I think that plays that authentic piece. When you are in that sales process, if you can provide value, if you could provide this management consulting view versus the salesperson view, you automatically add value to that person. They will probably elect to go with you in the end because you're more of a consultant and finding them solutions versus trying to sell a widget. And your intent is to sell this widget. And so to me, that give first mentality, I think, is really part of what our society is looking for today, are people that are givers versus people just knocking on your door looking to sell you something. To me, that's another big takeaway I have from this one, is just give. Provide the information freely without expectation of anything in return.
Big takeaway for me, earn the right to ask questions because you did the research. How much more powerful was it when he even just did the role play? Hey, John, I saw the such and such article where you landed ABC company. Tell me about what the sales cycle looks like with that. Because you did the research, you've earned the right to ask that follow-up question and get into some level of detail versus just coming in, not having done any prep and just running and gunning and asking questions. It really honors that other person when you do the prep, when you do the research, and you earn the right to ask those questions. That's a big learning for me on this one.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I can just think through countless times where somebody did not earn the right and they just kept bombarding me with questions. My answers got shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
Hey, I got to run feeling versus if they're authentic and they've done their research and they're asking questions that they're genuinely curious about, they have earned the right. You feel like you want to provide them with your authentic answers because it's making you think, it's challenging you, it's providing you with the framework to really explore what is going on. That's management consulting in itself. Like, you think in most coaching practices, you're not even talking most of the time. You're just asking a good question. And the person's doing a lot of the talking because they're thinking through your question in a thought-provoking manner. So earning that right to ask questions, I never really thought about it that way before, but I certainly understand as well how impactful that is. Rich, if you think about the sales process, sales leadership, what do you think? And you can't say coaching. I think I've identified that the biggest problem and opportunity with sales leadership is coaching through this call. But in your experience, what would be the second? If it's coaching is number one, what would be the number two biggest opportunity to help improve your sales team as a manager today?
I would say the number one mistake that's made is assuming that everyone is going to sell the way that you sell, and not actually working with an individual based on their unique strengths, their abilities, their communication style, their background, their upbringing, their experience. I think as a sales leader, having to get the best out of your people means they may not do it the exact way that worked for you. I think it's really common for people to come in and force their template on someone else because it worked for them. I'm so confident it works. It does work. I did it. Let me tell you about it. Yeah, but it might not work for them. And you've really got to meet in the middle on what's the model that worked for you and what's the model that worked for them, and do a little bit more listening sometimes than talking to help them raise their game.
Yeah. The one I would say is sales comp. I feel like companies, and I've done this way too many times, we mess up the sales comp structure and we motivate them, but we motivate them on the wrong direction, on the wrong sale, for the wrong reasons, at the wrong margin, whatever that may be. Certainly, if you're listening to this and you're interested in learning more about sales compensation, let us know. Maybe we should get a sales compensation person, expert on this podcast, to talk about structuring the right sales comp for your sales team. Would you? I think that'd be an area that entrepreneurs would love to hear more about. How about you?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. Hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast. Give us a review. Go follow Mark on LinkedIn like he requested. Get his book, Learn to Love Selling, the Universal B2B Sales Playbook. Until next time, see you later.